Is your business blockchainable? A distinguished panel of experts discuss the different aspects that a business must possess to embrace blockchain. Mihaela, Ulieru, Endor.com. Antoine, Verdon, Proxeus. Claudius, BlockState. Max, Krupyshev, Cubits. Moderated by Anton Dalli, BCA.
Morning, everyone. Basically, before we joined this panel, we were discussing between us the current state of affairs of the blockchain. Everybody is speaking about this new technology, how it is a game changer, how it will change the future of doing business. Myself, I actually am an evangelist of that. But to be honest, how many applications are actually out there that have implemented the blockchain in real life? Apart from the presentation that we had by the gentleman before us, I think it is really a handful. In fact, I compared the current state of the blockchain to the internet before the invention of the browser. There were a couple of techies out there who used tools such as Telnet to communicate with other techies on the internet, but that was practically it. Then there was the invention of the World Wide Web, the browser, email clients, and that was when the actual people on the street started adopting this new technology. In fact, the internet itself didn't change much from then. It was only the applications on top of it that changed. But unfortunately, the blockchain is not a magic wand that can be used for any industry out there. In fact, this is one of the questions I would like to ask my panelists up here today. Which industries do you think really benefit from the implementation of blockchain as their underlying technology?
Yes. Well, there are a few properties of blockchain which definitely make a difference. So wherever you need a truth machine, immutability, traceability, provenance, where you need to prove things, supply chain is a no-brainer, provenance of diamonds like Everledger. But wherever you need to prove, for example, property, identity, whenever you need to prove value, like the case of Sapient Network, which is the Facebook on blockchain. I will tell about this a bit later. It's a system of accounting. The US government, the Pentagon, namely, lost $1 billion this year, and nobody can find $1 billion at the US government. So with blockchain, this wouldn't happen. For now, these are the industries I think are most affected.
I personally think every single industry will use blockchain in the future. Maybe not for everything, but I think blockchain is, you can look at it as the same type of revolution you had as the internet was coming, right? Just we don't see all aspects of the technology now because there are no clear models for a lot of fields. And we're pretty much at the time where, in terms of internet, we would be like 20 years ago when you would open a page and the image would go down like this, and it's very bad infrastructure. If you had asked people 20 years ago, will you need an internet website, most people would not have really understood the question. They would have said maybe, but there was no clear model for them. And I think it's the same for blockchain. If you ask yourself, will I need blockchain in the future? Of course, it's going to change the whole way businesses are structured. Do you have a clear way to apply it? Not yet, or maybe you can have a vision, but it's still not exactly defined which path it's going to take.
Yeah, I very much agree. I think as a business, you need to ask yourself the question, does blockchain really add any value to what I'm doing here? And what's really essential for businesses when they look at blockchain as an application case, as we were saying, Anton, we need some infrastructure and building blocks that can be used by these businesses to actually create value in what they're doing, enabled through blockchain. And I think until we're not at this stage, as you're saying, an internet browser browser, which can be used as an interface to access content and data. We need the same thing for blockchain. So, and this is what we're also, how I came in this space. So we saw there's a need of financial data in this space, and we're providing this. Just one example for building block. I think this is really the start that businesses can actually create value with blockchain applications.
Yeah, so in order to repeat a lot of the things, I completely agree with the speakers and bit fury, right? And I'm a strong believer that the land registry and governments really like implementing the blockchain will really help to make it more open and clear and auditable and immutable and so on. The main challenge that I see right now, like for example with the big businesses, right, huge businesses, for them integrating any sort of blockchain technology is a very big hassle and challenge, right? Because the systems which they use, they already have them implemented for years or decades even, like the frameworks which they use. So for them, integrating this new approach is a very big hassle. So I think that it should start from relatively small businesses, right, which are still quite flexible, right, to show good examples and the proof of the concept to the big businesses, right, to the huge machines, FMCG companies, and so on.
So we mentioned different industries. Do you have any particular applications, examples that you've been involved with that you can share with us today?
My favorite one is the advertisement industry. The power of disintermediation that blockchain brings enables the direct business to consumer linkage. So now we do not, advertisers and brands wouldn't need to pay the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, this centralized behemoth, all the money, but they can instead reward those who are really interested in the product and are watching an advertisement, for example, with a coupon of a discount, and so on and so forth. So that's I think, a really game changer for me.
There's a pretty cool application we've been working on recently that makes blockchain very tangible and concrete for me. It's a certification solution. We've been developing it together with the University of Basel in Switzerland, coming from the idea that a lot of employers, especially in regulated industries, in banking, audits, are now requested every time to certify the academic credentials of their future employees. And every time a university needs to provide those information, it takes a lot of time. For Basel, it takes about 90 minutes for every request, because first they have to get consent from the person to give their personal information to the employer, and then they have to get back to the employer. And it's a huge issue. I mean, if you look at the recent UNESCO studies, about 30% of the people in the world have fake credentials on their CV somehow, sometimes just a little exaggerated, like you pay $10,000 for a summer MBA in Stanford, and then you write, have a Stanford MBA or stuff like this. So it's a huge issue. And for them, we could build a blockchain solution which allows them to issue all certificates in PDF, hash the PDF, send the certificates to the students, that they can give them to the employers, and the employers have a drag and drop interface where they can very easily verify the documents without this intermediary of the university. And that's something we're rolling out where I think everyone can save costs. So for me, it's a very concrete example.
I think every industry can use blockchain where trust is essential and where you have currently centralized ledgers which need to be accessed by multiple parties. So when you look, I mean, especially the financial industry, obviously I might have a particular view on this because we're working in this area, is very much impacted by it. And I think as a start, when we look at data, for example, we're building a so-called DIA Foundation, which is a crossbreed of Wikipedia meets Bloomberg. So Bloomberg is a really centralized party providing data, and it's not very accessible to a nascent ecosystem. So if you're building a dApp which requires financial data, it's very hard to get good quality financial data. So opening up this to an ecosystem is really essential, and bringing transparent data to the market.
I wasn't involved in the implementation of the blockchain in the business, but if you ask me what are the good implementations, I think that using blockchain as a registry, right, for the documents and the patents, and for example, it can be used everywhere, right? It can be used in patents, it can be used, for example, in the lottos when you have to register all the bets or anything. So I think this is the most simple and the most obvious implementation of blockchain after cryptocurrencies itself, and the world is getting advantage from this feature already.
Max, I'm going to play a bit the devil's advocate here. Do you think all industries are prone to the implementation of blockchain?
That is quite a philosophical question, and the answer to this is also quite philosophical. So when we speak about the whole industries, right, of course we understand that industries which have problem with the trust, right, or auditability, or we're afraid that somebody will be able to change the data which is supposed to be registered, the main important ones are the governments, right? Because this is kind of like the authority which we all elect and which is supposed to do the job, right? And right now in most of the governments, and I'm from Ukraine, right? You can imagine the corruption there is a thing, right? So the main idea is that I believe that businesses and structures who need blockchain, they probably don't really want to implement blockchain because in this sense they will become open and auditable, and they not always want this. So this is also a big challenge what I see, if this answers your question.
I'm not sure if it answers the question, but I think it says that blockchain is important. I personally do not see where it wouldn't be important. And just to go on from what you were mentioning, using the token as an incentive to reward contribution, participation, involvement is really very powerful. So if you reach the individual, then the government, whatever big and centralized and corrupt they are, it's impossible to, to spread that corruption. I will say a bit more of this later.
Mm. And I think that there are some industries which are maybe more natural or easier to apply blockchain at first, but I think, as I said before, that blockchain will have an impact everywhere. So for me, it's more a question of having a clear vision how it's going to be implemented. And there is a clear vision in certain industries. It's more difficult to see now what's the path going to be in others. There are some businesses which are not blockchainable because it would make them irrelevant, like some intermediary businesses. And I think those will not be able to go on the next stage of digital transformation and will slowly disappear.
Yeah, I very much agree. I think you can't really say one industry will use blockchain and the other won't. I think it's very use case specific, and we'll see a lot of companies using blockchains in one way but not in the other, where centralized ledgers just make more sense. But what you were saying, I think, is quite critical. It's very much about are organizations and companies willing to adapt the technology or not? And I think it's something we as consumers can really drive and ask for and influence very much.
In fact, I agree perfectly well with you, Paul, on what you were saying just now. In fact, I think it's very specific to a particular application. If I may use an everyday example, you can put in a nail inside a piece of wood with a set of pliers. But actually the tool to use that is a hammer. Would you have a similar example for an application that would not make sense for blockchain application?
So I think, blockchain is not the most efficient ledger if you want to store a lot of data. So you can't save everything on the blockchain, and it just doesn't make sense. So I think it's an essential tool if you want to redistribute trust among a system, and that makes very much sense. I think we saw with a lot of crappy ICOs that not everywhere the blockchain is needed, and people are needed to be very creative to find a use case. And it just makes sense for some applications and not for others.
Yeah, for me, in software development, there is this the traditional web stack, which is about to be complemented by several layers of blockchain. So for me, it's about choosing and understanding where in this stack to put blockchain. And the whole applications will not run exclusively on blockchain, but blockchain will, at some points of the stack, have relevance to verify or register information, timestamp it, permission it, but you will still have, at some points, private databases and other traditional parts of the stack.
Mihaela?
I'm a total believer in blockchain, so I agree with the points of my colleagues, but I don't have more counterexamples. I have more examples for blockchain.
No, I will also skip this one.
Very good. One last thing. We've been hearing how Malta wants to become the blockchain island. Those of you who were listening to the legal sessions yesterday, I think that we are in the right direction of actually achieving such a status. But I am also a believer that regulation is only one part of it. Actually showing use cases for the technology is as important as having the proper regulation. If you had to pick one particular application that the Maltese Islands could implement, what would that be?
So I'd like to start off with that, if you may, because this is exactly the reason why we're here. And it's really great to see how the Maltese government, the regulator, the MSE, the whole ecosystem is pushing towards transparency. And since we're a provider of transparent financial data, this is really a building block. And I think it's one of the most forward-thinking countries and regulators who actually see the value of bringing this transparency. So obviously, I'm very keen to see our implementation in this regard here.
Go ahead. I'll have the last word, maybe.
When I think of Malta as a blockchain island, I mean, what's the purpose of a blockchain island? It's to get businesses registering themselves here, right? And I think if you ask what should Malta do as a first step in terms of government to attract businesses, I would say the most natural one to be to allow them to create businesses using or on blockchain. We did a similar project in Switzerland, digitizing the Swiss company register, and we could significantly reduce the time to register businesses from 10 days to 1 hour, 37 minutes in the example we created last April. And I think if Malta could provide this type of level of efficiency to businesses registered here, leading to a whole range of other automation of processes, that could be a good start.
So if we implement that in Malta from the current 3 days, we can go to half an hour?
Maybe.
Yeah, so right now, like here, although we speak blockchain island, right? But right now, as it all goes through MFSA, which is a financial authority, right? It is still more like in the sense of cryptocurrency, right? So the main idea is to regulate businesses who work with cryptocurrencies. And these are basically businesses which really generate the money, right? So it's not so much about implementing blockchain, it's more about exchanges or the processing and so on. So the main idea is that Malta regulates these businesses, invites them to the island, and helps them to create a banking ecosystem. If it is done, then we already have a solid ground for the future development.
Mihaela, we have 1 minute
as you
left.
mentioned, actually, as you remarked, yes, Malta is leading the way when it comes to regulation for blockchain technologies. So I want just to, take you a bit to the future, but I think here it can happen faster than anywhere else, because the regulation, like now in the works, the latest is giving legal personality to non-human entities, and these can be DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations, or autonomous cars. So finally, we know what to do when an autonomous car has to make a decision or has an accident. We do the same as we would do to a person. And I think this is phenomenal, and I would bet on this kind of application to lead the way.
Perfectly agreed. Thank you. That's our time up.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.